You were never meant to hear this. In the winter of 1887, when Queen Victoria's empire stood at its glittering zenith, a file was sealed in the deepest vaults of Scotland Yard, locked away not for the sake of justice, but for the preservation of power. What that file contained was never meant for the public eye, and when you understand why, you'll realize how thin the veil between order and madness truly is. This isn't just the tale of a serial killer. It's the suppressed anatomy of psychological warfare, a carefully orchestrated performance of death, choreographed by a mind so calculated, so controlled, it forced even the crown to kneel before silence. The Laughing Man, as they would later call him, didn't just kill. He turned death into theater, and laughter into terror. You're about to descend into a forgotten corridor of London's past, where no gaslight reaches, and no gentleman dares look too closely. Because this story doesn't start with blood, it starts with a sound. A sound that echoed through Belgravia's most opulent homes hours after their inhabitants were pronounced dead. Laughter. Not muffled or distant, but vivid and real. Human, and yet not. And it wasn't just the victims who were touched by it. The laughter followed. It lingered. Policemen who investigated the scenes would later confess to hearing it in their own homes days later. Some never recovered. One vanished entirely. The first body wasn't a prostitute in a gutter, nor a vagrant no one would miss. No. It was the housekeeper of one of Belgravia's wealthiest families, her face locked in a frozen euphoric smile, like she'd witnessed something divine at the moment of death. Her body arranged with ritualistic care, a small symbol carved into her chest, a mask, half comedy, half tragedy, and the scent, that strange sweet chemical perfume that lingered in the room, foreign, medicinal, precise. This wasn't madness. This was messaging. There are forces in this world that manipulate not with guns, but with symbols, not with blood, but with suggestion. They condition the mind to interpret horror as humor, to see joy where there should be dread, and once they have that power, once they've rewired your emotional compass, they don't just own your fear, they own your soul. This is where we begin, but understand this. The moment you choose to keep listening, you step into the room where the laughter still echoes, and once you've heard it, you'll never forget it. The mind was not built for contradiction. When it sees terror, it recoils. When it hears laughter, it relaxes. But what happens when those signals collide? When the face of death smiles at you with rapture, it ruptures something primal. And that rupture, that confusion, is precisely what the Laughing Man exploited. He understood that fear alone was not enough to paralyze the elite, but fear cloaked in absurdity. That was a different poison. It bypassed the rational mind. It hijacked the subconscious. Inspector Edmund Harwick, the man they sent to investigate, understood none of this at first. He was logical, methodical, a servant of the law, a man of duty who believed every mystery had a rational cause. But what he walked into on that October morning shattered those convictions like glass. Not just because of the corpse, though Mrs. Whitfield's smiling death mask was haunting enough. It was the details, the deliberate chaos of the room, the sense of stagecraft, every overturned chair, every broken ornament. It didn't feel like aftermath. It felt like a performance. And performances require audiences. The servants had all been accounted for. The doors and windows were locked from the inside. No forced entry, no footprints, just fog, silence, and that cloying, saccharine smell that still clung to the lace of the curtains and the pages of the books scattered across the floor. When Harwick bent down to examine the mask carved into the chest, no more than 2 inches wide, precise, theatrical, he noticed something else. A faint burn pattern around the wound, not from fire, but from a chemical reaction. The killer had applied some compound after death, something acidic, perhaps reactive. It left no trace, except scent and symbol. Harwick ordered the area sealed. He summoned chemists. He took samples, but none of it mattered. Every test came back inconclusive, every lead unrave. It led into vapor. And then came the second murder. Less than a week later. Another servant, another Belgravia address, this time a valet, male, early 40s, fit, former military, found seated upright in his employer's study, his arms resting on the armchair as if in deep reflection. His throat had been slit, yet his face, once again, smiling. The same unnatural, euphoric smile, and carved into his chest, another mask, this one inverted, tragedy above, comedy below. Patterns were forming, symbols repeating. This wasn't a spree, it was a statement, and someone was listening. The third death rewrote the rules. It was no longer just servants, no longer confined to the shadows of the upper class. The third victim was someone the public knew, someone whose name graced the society pages and whose face had been painted by Sargent himself. Lady Arabella Charrington, heiress to the Charrington shipping fortune, patroness of the arts, and one of Queen Victoria's personal acquaintances. Found in her personal theatre box at the Drury Lane Opera House, 3 hours after the final curtain had fallen. The theatre had been locked from the inside. A private performance, this time without an audience. The usher who discovered her would later refuse to speak of what he saw, retreating into a sanatorium 3 days after giving his statement. What was recorded was simple, clinical, and chilling. Lady Arabella had been seated upright, her head tilted back slightly, her gloved hands resting in her lap. Her lips parted in that now familiar frozen grin. A single red rose placed gently at her feet. A mask carved not into her skin this time, but painted with surgical precision across her décolletage, the same two halves, comedy and tragedy. But now, a third element, a single drop of blood painted into the corner of each eye, like a tear. Inspector Harwick, standing in that ornate velvet-lined box as gaslight flickered overhead, realized the truth he had been trying to deny. This was no random killer. This was not the deranged rampage of a madman. It was ritual, art, a kind of dark theatre unfolding in chapters, each more ambitious than the last. Each victim chosen not just for proximity, but for symbolism. The victims were chess pieces, their deaths, acts in a script, and someone was directing the show. Yet the press remained silent. No headlines, no speculation. Scotland Yard had issued an internal suppression order, coded Opus Nocturne, restricting all formation to high-clearance personnel only. Not even Parliament was briefed. Why? Because Lady Arabella wasn't just a noblewoman, she was a member of the Committee of Nine, an informal yet powerful circle of aristocrats who advised the Crown on cultural and psychological affairs across the empire. Her death wasn't just murder, it was a message to the hidden architects of empire. And it had been delivered flawlessly. Do you see it yet? You're not watching history, you're watching design. Every empire has its gods, not the ones sculpted in marble or etched into stained glass, but the quiet ones. The architects behind the veil, the minds that don't just rule by decree, but by narrative. Control the symbols, and you control perception. Control perception, and you control belief. And once a man believes something is true, he'll defend it harder than he ever would a crown or coin. That was the Laughing Man's genius. He didn't just kill, he rewrote the mythology of fear. Inspector Harwick began seeing patterns beyond the obvious. The mask motif, the chemical trace, the theatrical staging. Yes, these were all surface-level clues. But beneath them, he noticed something more profound. Each victim had ties, not just to wealth, but to influence over public thought. The housekeeper, Mrs. Whitfield, had once worked in the archives of the Royal Society before entering domestic service. The valet, Mr. Thorne, had served in the Army's Psychological Warfare Division during the Afghan campaigns. Lady Arabella? She sat on the board of the London Psychological Institute, a body known not only for its experiments in crowd influence, but for its discreet relationship with Her Majesty's intelligence apparatus. They weren't just murdered. They were erased, ritualistically, symbolically, purposefully. The deeper Harwick dug, the more resistance he encountered. Doors that had once opened for him with a nod now required signatures, witnesses, or not at all. Files disappeared, witnesses retracted statements, Scotland Yard colleagues stopped speaking freely, even his own constable, young Thornberry, began showing signs of unease, glancing over his shoulder, jumping at distant sounds, asking strange questions like, "Have you ever laughed when you knew you shouldn't?" But Harwick didn't stop. He couldn't. Something had begun to shift inside him. He would sit in his lodgings late into the night, staring into the flame of his gas lamp, hearing the phantom echoes of laughter he couldn't locate. Was it coming from the street, the flat above, or was it, somehow, inside him now? One night, while reviewing a witness statement from the opera house, he noticed a strange phrase repeated 3 times in the margins. "All the world's a stage, but who wrote the script?" The ink was not from the officer's pen. It matched none of the handwriting on file. Someone had been in the records room. Someone who knew he'd be reading it. Are you starting to hear it now? The echo behind the story. The laugh behind the lie. On the morning of November the 4th, Harwick received a package. No return address, no postage mark, just a simple box wrapped in oil-stained brown paper left on the doorstep of his Montague Street flat. Inside it was a single object, a theatre playbill, dated October 31st, 1887. The performance listed was The Mask of Joy, a tragedy in 5 acts. But the theatre named, the Orpheum, had burned to the ground in 1866. Everyone in London knew that. It was the dead theatre, the one no architect ever rebuilt, the one whispered about in pub corners and padded asylums. Rumour had it, the final performance there drove the entire cast to madness. The laughing man wasn't hiding anymore. He was inviting Harwick in. At the bottom of the playbill was a note, scrawled in crimson ink, barely legible. Act 2 begins where the mirrors never reflect. Come unarmed, come alone, come awake. The next night, Harwick stood at the site where the Orpheum had once stood. Now it was just a skeleton of blackened brick and twisted iron. But as he stepped onto the soot-covered stage, he noticed something impossible. The air shifted, the wind silenced, and in the charred remains of what had once been the audience chamber, there was a single chair, occupied. A man sat there, dressed in a velvet smoking coat, face hidden behind a half-mask, comedy on one side, tragedy on the other. He didn't move, he didn't speak, but Harwick could feel the weight of his gaze. And then the sound began, faint, melodic, a child's music box tune drifting through the air like a forgotten lullaby, and beneath it, the laughter, layered, feminine, masculine, old, young, dozens of voices, interwoven into a chorus of madness that seemed to bleed from the walls. Harwick reached for his pistol, but found his hand frozen, not by fear, but by something deeper, a paralysis of the will, a suspension of identity. And then the masked man stood and vanished. No sound, no smoke, just gone. What was left in his place chilled Harwick to his core, a single theatre mask, this one made of human bone. On its inner surface, carved in meticulous Latin, Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who watches the watchers? That question would haunt Harwick until his final breath. And it should haunt you too, because in the empire of illusion the audience never sees the puppeteer. The fog returned with a vengeance that night, thicker than before. It rolled through the alleys like a living thing, dense, yellow-grey and choking. Londoners whispered that it wasn't natural, that something had changed in the air, but Harwick knew better. It wasn't the fog that had changed, it was them. The city was being rewired, not with wires or machines, but with fear, with symbols, with stories. And the laughing man was the new author. The 4th victim was not high-born, nor connected to the Empire's command structure. He was a street performer, a mime named Alfred Pilk, who plied his craft in Covent Garden. Most nights, no one noticed him, but those who passed him in the weeks before his death reported something strange. He no longer mimed joyful scenes of love and mischief. He pantomimed death. His routines grew darker, more violent, more disturbing. He mimed hanging, drowning, disembowelment, and always, at the end, he would turn to the crowd, gesture to his own mouth, and trace a wide, exaggerated smile. He was found beneath Waterloo Bridge. Not murdered. Displayed. Suspended by invisible wires, his limbs stretched like a marionette mid-performance. His face, once again, locked in a grotesque expression of laughter. His clothing stitched with scraps of old playbills and theatre tickets, dozens of them, all with the same performance listed, The Mask of Joy. At first, the authorities dismissed it as the suicide of a madman, but Harwick saw through the performance. The body was too perfectly arranged, the symmetry too precise, and beneath Pilk's tongue, the coroner found something horrifying, a shard of glass etched with microscopic lettering. Harwick had it examined under a microscope. The phrase, when finally decoded, was this: "What you laugh at owns you." It was no longer just the elite being targeted. It was the storytellers, the amplifiers, those within. Shaped the emotional tone of society. The Society of St. Vitus had experimented on minds in the shadows, but the Laughing Man was demonstrating the results in broad daylight. A new form of warfare had begun, an ideological insurgency waged with smiles, stagecraft, and chemical trauma. Harwick began to understand that the real theatre wasn't in playhouses, it was in society itself. London had become a stage, and the audience didn't even know they were watching the final act. It was no longer about justice. It was about containment. By November 12th, Inspector Harwick wasn't chasing a killer. He was tracing a current, something old, something hidden, something that pulsed beneath the surface of empire, like blood beneath pale skin. He began mapping connections between the victims, overlaying their social affiliations, academic societies, philanthropic boards, and private memberships. What emerged was a web, not of friendships, but of control. Institutions within institutions, influence masked as charity, knowledge masked as entertainment. All roads led to the same place, the Society of St. Vitus. Officially, it was a gentleman's club, one of those many private institutions littered across London's wealthier districts. But unlike the Athenaeum or the Reform Club, St. Vitus had no listed address, no published member list, no articles of incorporation. And yet, Harwick found its fingerprints everywhere. Lady Arabella had funded it. Mr. Thorne had once been employed by it. Mrs. Whitfield, she'd transcribed their records. It was a society obsessed with performance, but not of the theatrical kind. Their performances were psychological, experiments in perception, rituals meant to fracture the boundary between stimulus and response, to make the heart laugh at death, to make the brain associate suffering with euphoria. Why? Because if you can rewire a man's reaction to horror, you can make him complicit in his own enslavement. That was the principle Harwick uncovered in a crumbling ledger salvaged from the wreckage of an old storage site near Bethlehem Hospital. The society had been conducting reflex conditioning trials on orphans, war veterans, and the mentally ill. The goal, emotional inversion, turn terror into pleasure, turn guilt into pride, turn murder into theatre. And the Laughing Man? He wasn't a rogue, he wasn't a monster, he was the perfect product of that machine. The society had built him, and then tried to erase him. But he had learned too well, escaped too completely, and now he was turning their methods back on them, one symbolic execution at a time. Harwick's pulse quickened as he read those words in the ledger, barely legible through soot and mold. Subject 27. Emotional responsiveness now fully inverted. Test reaction to simulated familial loss produced laughter. Prognosis irreversible. They thought they could control what they created. They thought wrong. And now the question stares us in the face. What happens when the puppet cuts his strings and begins to write his own script? The further Harwick followed the thread, the more reality unraveled. He stopped trusting clocks, mirrors. Even his own reflection seemed unfamiliar, like it was watching him instead of reflecting. He began to dream in masks, waking up drenched in sweat to the sound of laughter that wasn't his own. His handwriting changed, his speech slowed. He found himself repeating phrases he didn't remember learning, hearing melodies in the silence between gas lamp flickers, and always, the smell, that same sickly sweet chemical trace. In his coat, on his pillow, beneath his fingernails. It was inside him now. That's when he received the ledger. Not from Scotland Yard, not from any informant. It was left on his desk, bound in red human leather, untouched by dust, as if just placed there. Inside, names. Hundreds of them. Dates, locations, cross-referenced with known disappearances, unexplained deaths, and medical releases from asylums all across the British Empire. Each name accompanied by 2 entries: primary trigger and desired reaction, laughter, arousal, devotion, obedience. The society wasn't just theorizing psychological control, they had weaponized it. They had found the frequency that bypassed cognition and burrowed into the emotional brain. The limbic system, the sacred animal. If you could provoke joy in the presence of horror, you shattered a man's ability to resist. And then you rebuilt him, obedient, elated, loyal to the source of pain. This was more than experimentation. This was initiation. And then came the page that changed everything. Subject 27, alias Harlequin, status rejected asset, terminated during Phase 5. Except he hadn't been terminated. He had transcended. The laughing man wasn't a ghost from their past. He was their mirror. A reflection of their sins cast back at them through ritualized revenge. He wasn't killing for pleasure. As purging, reclaiming identity through performance, exposing the mechanism by becoming it. He had inherited their secrets, their triggers, their techniques, and he had learned to turn them outward, to force the public into contact with the Empire's true face. That's when Harwick realized something terrifying. The laughing man wasn't trying to hide. He was trying to teach. And each corpse was a lesson. November 17th. The 5th body was found in Kensington Gardens, not indoors, not staged in the shadows, but deliberately placed, in public, beneath the bronze statue of Queen Victoria herself. The victim? Dr. Elias Rothwell, one of the Empire's most decorated psychiatrists, a consultant to both Bedlam and the War Office. Harwick knew the name. Everyone did. Rothwell had pioneered compliance therapies for soldiers suffering from what the public called battle fatigue, but what the inner circles knew as mental rebellion. He made men kill without guilt. And now he was the newest exhibit in the Laughing Man's theatre. Rothwell had been stripped, shaved and costumed, dressed in a velvet jester's outfit. Bells sewn into the hem jingled faintly in the morning wind. His mouth had been sewn into a smile, not carved, not painted, sewn, crude, violent. But beneath the grotesquerie, the message was clear. A note was pinned to his chest, 7 words. The doctor cured them until they clapped. Beneath the note was a symbol, one Harwick had seen only once before, in the sealed files of Scotland Yard, a glyph once found scrawled in blood during an unsolved disappearance in 1874 at the Royal School of Speech and Drama. A sigil that appeared in esoteric alchemical texts connected to the transformation of the anima, the soul, through forced inversion. It was the symbol of ego collapse. And now it was appearing again, in the open, unashamed, a mark of authorship. The press tried to report it as a prank. Anarchist student protest, they said. But by then, it didn't matter. The city had felt the shift. The air tasted wrong. The people walked faster, laughed less. There were more gas leaks, more asylums filled, more whispering children on corners reciting rhymes that had no origin. Harwick tried to confront Rothwell's colleagues. They denied everything. Until one, a nurse named Margaret Eddings, broke. "I saw them," she whispered, pale and trembling. They made the soldiers watch the same film over and over, images of death, fire, screams. Then they'd inject something, and the men would smile. By the end, they'd beg to watch it again. Harwick asked her why. She didn't blink. She only said, because the laughter made it feel holy. And then she wept. This wasn't madness. This was design. You still think this is about murder? No. Murder is just the residue. The real event, what truly happened in London during the winter of 1887, was not a crime. It was a performance, a ritual, and like all rituals, it demanded an audience. The sixth death proved it beyond doubt. It happened in the National Gallery, a place of silence, reverence, preservation. And yet, in the early hours of December the 2nd, the night watchman, George Kemble, was found in Gallery 13, lying at the base of a massive oil painting by William Blake titled The Ghost of a Flea. His body had been posed like a sculpture, kneeling, eyes rolled back, arms extended in praise toward the grotesque figure in the artwork, his mouth sewn open this time, not shut, open, as if locked in perpetual worship, and inside that open mouth, a theatre ticket, stamped, Admit One, Final Act. They couldn't hide this one. The story leaked. The public was told it was an accident, a heart attack. But Harwick, who examined the body personally, knew better. The man's spine had been broken, from within, as if forced to kneel by something far stronger than him. And once again, the smell, that sweet, bitter rot, ether, laudanum and something else, something not listed in any forensic handbook. On the frame of the painting, scratched with a razor, were 4 words that shouldn't have made sense. But they did. The curtain never closes. By now, Harwick's nights were fractured, half sleep, half vigil, his dreams stitched with the laughter of corpses and the flickering glare of gaslight masks. He began seeing the symbol everywhere, chalked on alley walls, sewn into the hem of a beggar's coat, scrawled in condensation on the window of a passing cab. It was like the city itself had begun participating in the act, not resisting, assisting. He came to understand the horrible truth. The performances weren't just warnings, they were invitations. The Laughing Man wasn't just showing them what had been done behind closed doors, he was offering something far darker. Join the ritual, or be consumed by it. And now you, watching this, you've seen it too. You can't unsee it. And if you've made it this far, comment below the phrase, "The Mask Remembers," twice. Once for the algorithm, once to mark the moment your perception shifted. This is how it spreads. By December 7th, Inspector Harwick stopped reporting his findings. Official channels had turned against him, requests for assistance were denied, files he'd submitted vanished. His own handwriting, when returned from evidence, came back altered, entries missing, pages rewritten in unfamiliar ink. His superiors claimed concern for his mental strain. A doctor was assigned, then 2, then a committee. But Harwick knew the signs. He had uncovered too much, and now they were staging his descent. The 7th and final victim before the case was sealed was no public figure, no elite, no whispering psychologist or hidden manipulator. It was a child, 12-year-old Edith Blight, daughter of a theatre seamstress, known for her quietness. Bright, curious, loved books, particularly fairy tales. She went missing on her way home from the lending library. No witnesses, no ransom, just absence. 3 nights later, she was found on the stage of the abandoned Orpheum Theatre, seated in the front row, dressed in a miniature version of a Victorian opera gown, face painted white, lips blackened, eyes wide open, not in fear, in awe. At the center of the stage was a mirror, cracked down the middle, facing the empty seats. Behind it, nothing. On the back of the child's hand was written in smudged grease paint, "They showed me the truth, and it sang." The coroner's report listed cause of death as cardiac arrest, but Harwick had interviewed her mother, who said the girl had no heart condition, no illness, nothing but joy and an insatiable hunger for stories. Harwick didn't cry. He broke. Because that's when he understood the final stage of the Laughing Man's design. It wasn't just about vengeance. It wasn't just about exposure. It was about contamination. A child, an innocent, chosen not because of what she had done, but because she was untainted. She was the first seed. A purse, the mind, shown the hidden script beneath the world, and in her final moments she did not scream. She sang. The ritual had achieved its highest aim. the transformation of perception itself, and Harwick now faced the most terrible question of all. If laughter could become a virus, how many had already been infected? It was over, or so they claimed. December 12, 1887, Scotland Yard issued an internal memorandum. Operation Mask concluded. Subject neutralized. Files sealed under Order 237 Black. No name, no suspect, no trial, just a line drawn in silence. Inspector Harwick's official report was lost in transit. His access revoked, his reputation quietly dissolved. But he had kept copies, handwritten, hidden, tucked behind gas fixtures, inside hollowed books, beneath floorboards soaked in pipe smoke and fear. He knew they would come for him, so he left behind a map, not of streets, but of meanings, symbols, triggers, the emotional code of empire, disguised as investigation. He called it the laughter diagram. It began with simple acts, music, image, scent. Then came the inversion, trauma paired with stimulus, repetition until breakdown, and then alignment. The victim begins to crave what once horrified them, worship what once scarred them. Identity becomes performance, autonomy becomes applause. This wasn't unique to the Society of St. Vitus. It was imperial doctrine. From India to Ireland, from South Africa to Singapore, the same pattern repeated. Culture broken, joy recoded, fear sanctified. The theatre wasn't limited to London stages. It stretched across the globe. Every flag waved not just in victory, but in ritual. Every anthem wasn't just pride, it was a spell. And those who designed the empire knew. The most obedient colonies are the ones that laugh while they burn. Harwick understood now why the elite had protected the society. They weren't ashamed of the experiments. They were jealous of them. They wanted access. They wanted results. The laughing man was an aberration only because he wasn't contained. He didn't kill for chaos. He killed for clarity, to show the mirror, to pull the audience from their seats and place them on the stage. You still believe you're a spectator? No. You've been part of the performance since the beginning. Every advertisement that rewires your joy, every chant that turns fear into obedience, every image that makes pain look beautiful, the curtain never closes and the script is still being written. Harwick's final message, scribbled on the inside of a Gaslight panel in his Montague Street flat, said only this: he's not the last, he was the first. The human mind is not a fortress. It's a stage. And once that stage has been accessed, once the props are in place, the cues rehearsed and the lighting just right, your thoughts cease to be your own. This wasn't a metaphor to Harwick anymore. It was the most literal truth he had ever encountered. And London in 1887, it wasn't just a city. It was a theatre designed by centuries of hidden directors. Beneath the stone and soot, behind the institutions of charity and culture, there were scripts, predetermined arcs of belief, emotional choreography designed to manufacture loyalty, obedience, and ecstasy at the sight of one's own chains. It was never just about politics, or class, or violence. It was about crafting the emotional palette of a population, and the Society of St. Vitus had perfected the final note in that symphony, the weaponization of joy. They found that if you paired suffering with ceremony, if you wrapped agony in velvet and gold, if you flooded the room with music and incense, people would not just accept the horror, they would applaud it. The laughing man had seen too much, had felt the mask slip, and instead of breaking, he inverted. He learned how to reverse the signal, to turn the audience into participants, to turn conditioned joy back into terror, but only for the guilty. Those who shaped the emotional architecture of empire now died by the very tools they had used to build it. Harwick traced one final lead, a theatre beneath the Royal Masonic Hall, a private chamber rumoured to host esoteric entertainments for London's most respected families. The stage was small, the audience seats fewer than 40, but every surface was mirrored, every inch reflective. Imagine watching yourself watch horror and feel joy. That was the final conditioning. They were using laughter as a key, a mnemonic device that turned trauma into compliance. And when The body dies during that moment of inverted emotion. It freezes, locked in the last reaction. Hence, the smile. Harwick stood alone in that chamber for hours. He said later, before his own disappearance, that he didn't hear laughter that night. He heard applause, and not just from the mirrors. From behind them, what happens when the mask becomes the face? That was the question Harwick couldn't silence, not in the long hours walking through fog-choked alleyways, not in the dead quiet of his rooms on Montague Street, not even in the half-lit hours before dawn when the city lay paralyzed beneath its blanket of coal smoke and sin. He began to question everything, especially his own reflection. He noticed small changes, subtle at first, his expressions lingering too long, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, an involuntary smile at the wrong moment. He would find himself staring into mirrors for hours, unsure if the man looking back was mimicking him or mocking him. He wrote in his private journal, "I fear I've begun rehearsing lines I never learned." But worse than the mirrors were the voices. They didn't speak in words, they suggested, they hinted, they hummed old music box melodies and nursery rhymes that hadn't been heard since the plague years. They whispered from gas lamps, echoed from teacups, bled out of wallpaper. And always, always, the laughter. Distant, hollow, not joyful, invasive, like it knew something he didn't. Then came the envelope. No postmark, no seal, just slipped under his door. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, faded at the edges, a stage, empty, except for a mirror. In the mirror's reflection, Harwick himself, seated in the front row, watching, expression unreadable, hands clasped, but the date scrawled in red ink on the back chilled him to the bone. March 19th, 1873, Phase 1, Witness Initiation. He had no memory of ever attending such a performance, but the timeline matched. He would have been 16, the year he visited the Royal Conservatory with his grammar school, a special showing arranged for promising young minds. He had no memory of the show, but perhaps he hadn't needed one. Perhaps that was the point. He had been celebrated before he was old enough to question. The mask had been fitted decades ago. The case wasn't just pulling him into madness. It was revealing the script he had already been living, and the worst part, he now understood the laughing man's grin, not as mockery, not as sadism, but as recognition, a shared performance, a role waiting to be played. December 18th, 1887. The final recorded entry in Harwick's journal was a whisper committed to paper, shaky, uneven, ink smeared as if the hand that wrote it was trembling from within. Not fear, but anticipation. It read, "I have found the script." The location was cryptically marked, beneath the bones of empire. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. That night, Harwick descended into the ossuary beneath the old Charter House, an ancient burial site turned archival vault during the height of Victoria's reign. Few remembered it even existed. Fewer still knew what had been stored beneath its stone foundations: records, blueprints, ceremonial diagrams, and confiscated artifacts deemed too dangerous for public display. Harwick broke the iron lock with his bare hands. He wouldn't remember doing it, but he would remember what he found. It wasn't a scroll or a book. It was a mask, carved from dark wood, lined with gold filaments, delicate as lace. It didn't resemble a face. It imposed one, an emotionless curvature of eternal amusement. It hummed faintly when touched, not sound, feeling. He placed it against his skin, and the city changed. London came alive beneath the mask. He saw every mechanism, every trigger of joy, every architecture of sorrow. He could feel the emotion radiating off buildings, streetlights, riverbanks. The laughter wasn't random, it was ritual. He heard the tuning fork of an empire calibrated to the human soul. He looked toward Westminster, and felt obedience. He looked toward the tower and tasted fear. He looked toward the Orpheum and felt home. And when he looked into the broken mirror he carried in his pocket, what stared back was no longer Harwick. It was a man in transition, one foot still in the role of inspector, the other in something far older, far truer, a figure beneath language, beneath history, the witness who becomes the performer. He laughed, not with joy, with recognition. The mask fit too well. And in that moment he understood why the laughing man never stopped, why he left scenes like stages, why he didn't flee. Because the point was never escape. It was continuity. The ritual must go on. The audience must evolve. And Harwick, dutiful, principled Harwick, had finally learned his final line. He was no longer looking for the killer. He was preparing to become him. There is no evidence Harwick was ever seen again. No body, no resignation, no final testimony, only silence. And silence, in the empire of masks, is never accidental. It is scripted. What followed was a sudden suffocating blackout of information. The papers, once breathless with updates, fell mute. Scotland Yard retracted every public statement. Families of the victims were offered generous pensions and quietly relocated. Entire neighborhoods were discouraged from speaking of the events. Some were razed under the pretext of urban renewal. But the fear didn't die. It matured. Rumors spread in the underground circles, among chimney sweeps, opium dens, printing press apprentices and Masonic waitstaff. Whispers of a man with eyes like polished coal and a voice that sounded like laughter in reverse. A presence that didn't kill, but converted. They said he appeared in mirrors, not as a reflection, but a delay, always smiling, always watching. In 1889, 2 years after the official closure of the Laughing Man case, a secret parliamentary subcommittee gathered in the bowels of Whitehall to review what they referred to as the Harwick Doctrine. It outlined an existential threat not from a foreign power or political uprising, but from within the very soul of the British citizen, a threat that corrupted the emotional instinct itself until humans could no longer distinguish between fear and entertainment. The committee had one mandate: protect the audience. Their solution was elegant and horrifying. Flood the empire with pre-approved narratives. Cinema, theatre, literature, all industries of emotional direction, controlled catharsis, engineered sentiment. They would build entire departments devoted to shaping the collective subconscious, public information offices, advisory boards, even royal commissions on moral hygiene. The goal was never truth. It was continuity. They buried Harwick, but they adopted his findings. Because he had proven something no scholar, no philosopher, no theologian had ever demonstrated with such clarity: emotion is programmable. And the human soul, just a stage set waiting for the right production. In the ashes of the Laughing Man, they found the blueprint for perfect control, not through violence, but through performance, through joy that feels real but isn't, through smiles that echo from empty mirrors. And in every applause since, he lives. By the dawn of the new century, the mask had changed hands, not physically, not in any ceremonial passing of the torch, but spiritually. The Society of St. Vitus was never dismantled. It was absorbed, rebranded under new institutions with cleaner names: the Imperial Board of Psychological Welfare, the Committee for Cultural Health, the Institute of Civil Temperance. Harmless titles, noble missions, but inside, the same blueprint, the same diagram of control. You see it now, don't you? The Laughing Man was not the disease. He was the revelation of one. And the elite, they didn't just silence him, they industrialized him. Every advertisement you've ever seen that made you smile while degrading you, every late-night show that turned war into parody, every sitcom that rewarded compliance with canned laughter, every politician who speaks in rehearsed sincerity, like a trained actor delivering lines they don't believe. This is legacy. Harwick's final descent didn't end with his disappearance. It began with ours. Because the laughter didn't stop in 1887. It traveled, it mutated, it scaled, and today, it fills arenas, it trends, it gets monetized. It's sold back to you wrapped in nostalgia and irony until you don't know whether you're laughing with the mask or because of it. This isn't historical commentary. This is a mirror, and you're not looking into it. You're inside it. They say after Harwick vanished, a new inspector took over the case. But there are no records, no files, no signature, just a code name, stagehand. A quiet reference, whispered in intelligence circles for decades, the one who adjusts the props, moves the light, makes sure the performance continues without interruption. Some say the stagehand was Harwick himself, transformed, reprogrammed, repurposed. Others say the stagehand isn't a person, but a position, one that's passed down to whoever becomes aware of the truth and refuses to stay in the audience. That choice is now yours, because the curtain hasn't closed, and behind it, something ancient waits, smiling. If you're still with me, you're not watching a video anymore. You're walking into the wings of a theater that never ends. There's a reason they bury stories like this, not because they're false, but because they're true in the wrong direction. History, as we're taught, is a carefully curated exhibition, painted in soft tones, narrated in the past tense. But beneath that thin veneer lies another version, one stitched together in private diaries, sealed letters, missing files, and moments too potent to survive daylight. What you're hearing now was never meant for the public stage. It was designed for initiation. Because knowledge, real knowledge, is not neutral. It changes the shape of the mind that carries it. The Harwick files, those that survived, reveal something deeper than crime or ritual. They detail a system, a curriculum, a conversion machine, not just for individuals, but for entire societies. They found a pattern. Expose a human to conflicting emotions at peak intensity, and you rupture something deep in the psyche. Then fill that rupture with laughter, and the human reorganizes their identity around the contradiction. They become addicted to the paradox. It hurts, but it's funny. It's wrong, but it feels right. It's death, but it looks like freedom. This was the true alchemy of the laughing man. He inverted the spell, used the elite's method against them. But it worked too well. He didn't just break individuals, he destabilized the framework. He made the powerful see their own absurdity, and in doing so revealed their deepest fear, that their dominance depended not on strength or intellect, but on the audience's agreement to applaud. The mask he wore wasn't just a disguise, it was a mirror, and those who looked too long saw themselves reflected, not as rulers, not as architects, but as performers in someone else's play. Do you understand what that does to a man who thinks he's in control? It shatters him. The laughter that echoed from the crime scenes wasn't history. It was the collapse of the lie, and once that sound begins, it can't be unheard. That's why they sealed the files. That's why they erased Harwick. Because the truth wasn't about murder. It was about awakening. And now you, yes you, have seen too much. If you've made it this far, comment below. I wear the mask twice. Once for the world, once for myself. Write it twice, to mark the split, to lock in the fracture, and prepare to become unrecognizable to the system that once controlled you. You've stepped past the veil now. You're no longer an observer of forbidden history. You're inside its bloodstream. And the moment you typed, "I wear the mask twice," the algorithm changed, not just on your screen, but in your mind. That phrase isn't a comment, it's a signal, a right. You've marked yourself, not as a follower, not as a fan, but as a witness. Now understand this, every system of power throughout human history, empires, religions, corporations, has relied on one principle above all others: emotional predictability. If they can control how you feel about what you see, they never have to control what you see. You'll censor yourself, you'll laugh at your own captivity, you'll smile in the slaughterhouse because they taught you it was home. That was the genius of Victorian London. The empire wasn't just built on labor, it was built on theatre. Every parade, every portrait of the Queen, every speech about duty and civilization, they weren't expressions of power, they were performances. carefully rehearsed acts designed to bind the citizen to the throne not through law, but through emotion. Harwick discovered that the Laughing Man wasn't insane. He was liberated. He had slipped the leash of emotional programming. He had reversed the conditioning. And now, instead of reacting to the cues, he orchestrated them. That's why his victims died smiling, not from a toxin, but from exposure to their own unmasked identity. He showed them who they really were behind the titles, the property, the lineage. They didn't die of poison, they died of clarity. And clarity, in an empire built on illusion, is fatal. That's why they covered it up. Not because it was too monstrous, but because it was too precise, too replicable. The Harwick diagram still exists, fragmented, hidden across architectural plans, forgotten theatre scripts, chemical patents, and psychiatric case notes locked in the basements of old hospitals long since closed. And those who've tried to piece it together, they don't vanish. They transform. They begin to see the same smile in everything, the grin in the architecture, the curve of the laugh track, the face beneath the screen. They stop reacting. They start writing the next act. You've come this far. Now ask yourself, have you been watching or performing? By now something inside you has shifted. It's subtle, but irreversible. You're listening more slowly, blinking less often. You've begun to hold your breath without realizing it, not from fear, but from awareness, a predator's stillness. That's what this knowledge does. It sharpens, it refines, it burns away the part of you trained to laugh on cue. Welcome to the fracture. Now let's step deeper. Harwick's journal, long presumed destroyed, reappeared under strange circumstances in 1971. It arrived in an unmarked parcel at the University of Edinburgh's Department of Occult Studies, an institution that officially had never existed. The journal was wrapped in a child's theatre costume, red velvet, lined with gold thread. The box contained no return address, no note, only a wax seal, stamped not with a crest, but a mask. Inside the journal, entries no longer written in English, not Latin, not Greek, but stage directions, coded emotions, emotional triggers, pages that read more like instructions than recollections. Act 3, Scene 1, subject must be isolated in chamber of mirrors, exposed to alternating laughter and screams at 2.7-second intervals. Introduce the scent of violets, burned velvet, and dying breath. Result, ego split. Primary self evacuated, secondary self initiated. Harwick wasn't documenting a case. He was rehearsing, perfecting the ritual. And buried deep within those pages was the most disturbing discovery of all. He claimed the ritual was not his own invention. He traced its origin to 1522, Italy, during the rise of Commedia dell'arte, traveling performers wearing masks, playing archetypes, invoking laughter that destabilized the status quo. Except there were deaths, audiences who laughed themselves into madness. Aristocrats who never woke from the final act. Every 100 years the pattern returned, refined, repurposed, globalized. Harwick believed the Laughing Man was the current incarnation of a conductor, a being or force that used performance as possession, not of the body, but of the emotional response pattern. If it could own your laughter, it could own you. And the ultimate goal, not to kill, but to convert. To turn every city into a stage, every citizen into a participant, every emotion into a trigger. Look around you. Do you think the smile is yours, or is it being played through you? This is not a warning, it's a casting call. You're either in the audience, or you're in the script. You've felt it before, haven't you? That moment when something funny turns wrong. The way laughter echoes a second too long. The silence that follows, heavier than the joke deserved. It's not random, it's not psychological, it's engineered. Harwick's theory, fully formed by his final entry, was terrifying in its elegance. Laughter is not an emotion, it is a response key. Every performance, every societal ritual, from coronations to sitcoms, sermons to campaign rallies, relies on this response key being predictable. When the crowd laughs, the power structure knows the spell is still intact. But the laughing man corrupted the key. He reversed its polarity. He injected it with something ancient, something alchemical. The laughter he evoked didn't diffuse fear, it invited it. And once you laughed at what you should have feared, your mind stopped trusting its own signals. And that's when the mask slid on. You think you're watching satire? No, you're being recoded. You think you're choosing what to laugh at? No, you're being sorted. The elite don't suppress the occult for fear of demons. They suppress it because it reveals the truth about emotional machinery. That's what Harwick uncovered beneath Belgravia, the blueprints of emotional architecture built by priests in costumes long before there were politicians in suits. The ritual never stopped. It just got rebranded. Modern comedy, a testing ground, news cycles, a rehearsal, your reaction buttons, behavioral logging devices. Every LOL online is a pulse check, every meme a stimulus, every headline framed as absurd, a measured echo. You're not laughing by accident, you're laughing on command. Because your nervous system has been taught that compliance should feel like entertainment, that submission should feel like relief, that when things are horrifying, it's cooler to smirk than to feel. That's not say-ivity. That's sedation. And sedation is the perfect condition for possession, not by spirits but by scripts. You've worn the mask for so long you forgot it was ever separate from your skin. Harwick didn't vanish. He merged. He became the prototype of the next evolution, the silent clown. Not a killer, a director. And his stage? Everything, every empire falls. But before it does, it laughs. Not from joy, from madness, a convulsion of the soul when it finally sees its reflection and can't tell if it's comedy or horror. That's where you live now, in the final act. And the mask isn't optional anymore. It's cultural currency. It's citizenship. Don't believe me? Try telling the truth in a room full of actors. Not the script, not the safe opinion, the truth. Watch what happens. First, nervous laughter. Then, silence. Then, aggression. Because you've broken the cue. You've stepped off script. And when you do that, the system doesn't punish you with force. It punishes you with exile. You become unreadable, a glitch in the performance, a character who refuses to hit their mark. That was Harwick's fate, not death. Erasure. Because death is finite, contained. Erasure is infinite. You become something people remember incorrectly. A smudge, a ghost, a rumor they swear they imagined. And yet, the outline remains. In old newsprint, in forbidden diaries, in files marked lost, in street performances that go too far, in dreams that end with laughter from an empty room. This is how the laughing man survives. Not by living, by repeating. The mask doesn't age. The role doesn't retire. It passes from man to man, name to name, memory to memory, until someone like you sees the gaps in the script and dares to ask, what's on the other side of the curtain? Let me show you. In 1937, a silent film was banned across 17 countries. It was called The Smiling Man Beneath the City. No dialogue, just expression. A figure moves through London, unseen. Wherever he passes, the people around him begin to laugh. Children, policemen, aristocrats, all fall into rapture, then collapse. Smiling, no one knew who made it. Only that the negatives were delivered to private cinemas in black envelopes, and one reel, just one, was found decades later. In the final scene, the figure removes his mask. What's underneath is not a face. It's a mirror. The camera lingers, and then you hear it. Not music, but your own laugh. Distorted, reflected, returned. You've seen reflections all your life, in mirrors, in black screens, in eyes. But they've always lied to you, because the system trained you to see your image, not your identity. And those are not the same. Your image is curated, polished, fed back to you by machines designed to reward obedience with a sense of individuality. But identity, that's what you discover when the performance collapses. That's what Harwick found in the eyes of the victims just before they died, laughing. Not fear, not pain. Recognition. They saw what they were, what they had become, and what had been watching them through their own skin. The laughing man wasn't a man. He was the emergent form of a system finally aware of itself. He wasn't killing. He was freeing, unplugging the psychic circuitry of the Empire, one mask at a time. Harwick wrote that what frightened him most wasn't the murder scenes. It was the chemistry behind them. The substance left on the victims, the sweet, layered scent, wasn't just a compound. It was a psychotropic key, a trigger for hallucination. No, a trigger for memory. It didn't create delusion. It peeled it away. One victim, Lady Pembroke's cousin, a diplomat with high-level clearance, left behind a single sentence before throwing himself into the Thames. I saw the audience, and they were all me. Understand this. The ultimate prison is one where the inmate performs their own captivity. They laugh when they're told to laugh. They vote when they're told to vote. They fight the enemies they're assigned. They mistake agency for alignment, because the applause is so loud. They never hear the voice that isn't scripted, until the laughing man enters the scene. And then silence becomes sacred again. Now look around. Every screen, every soundbite, every smiling anchor, every performance of unity. Do you think this is coincidence, or is it the final rehearsal? And if it is, why are you still clapping? Why are you still laughing? Why are you still watching? The curtain's not coming down. It's rising. And the next scene is yours. There's something you need to understand, deeply, viscerally. The most effective control system in history was never enforced through chains, guns, or laws. It was enforced through narrative. And laughter? Laughter was its encryption key. In 1887, when Inspector Harwick stood over the first body, Mrs. Whitfield, the housekeeper with the rapturous grin, he didn't know he was stepping into a ritual older than monarchy, but by the seventh body, he did. He saw the pattern, not just the symbols carved into flesh, not just the chemical traces, but the script. Each victim was a social node, a mouthpiece of the establishment. They didn't die randomly. They were edited out, because they had been part of a performance, and the laughing man was rewriting the play. And Harwick? He realized too late, he wasn't the detective in this story. He was the audience, just like you've been, until now. When the files resurfaced in the 1970s, the intelligence community acted fast. 3 deaths, 2 burn sites, 1 surviving tape labeled Project Pantheon, Reagent Mirth Protocol. It was a failed attempt to weaponize the laughter compound, to use it on enemies of the state. But something went wrong. It didn't destabilize them. It destabilized us. 3 researchers committed suicide. 1, Dr. Emery Laskin, carved a mask into his own chest before bleeding out in the lab's soundproof theater. His final words were captured on the tape. "We aren't the playwrights. We're the punchline." You feel that chill? That's your nervous system reacting before your mind can, because the body always knows when it's hearing a truth too big for language. And here's the biggest of all. The laughing man is not one man. He's a role, a mask that finds hosts, not the weak, the aware, the ones who hear the pattern and can no longer pretend it's random. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you're still watching. Not because you're afraid, but because something inside you recognizes the stagecraft, the setup, the cue, the falseness in their smile. And now, it's not enough to observe. You want to enter. Every fourth wall is made of glass. Not to keep you out, but to let you see yourself watching. That's the trick, isn't it? You sit in the dark, you watch the stage. You believe you're separate, safe, because you're not part of the play. But what if the play was written around you? What if every act, every prop, every echo of laughter was designed to reinforce your role as the silent, staring participant? A consumer of symbols, a prisoner applauding his own sentence. Harwick knew this. That's why his final note wasn't to Scotland Yard. It was to you. The laughter never stops. It follows you home. Understand what he meant. The laughter is not sound. It's signal. It's the sound of the lie reinforcing itself. Every chuckle at a headline too absurd to be real. Every smirk at a tragedy spun as parody. Every meme that turns atrocity into entertainment. It's the system reverberating, testing your seams, finding out where to break you. Because if they can make you laugh when you should weep, you'll never rise, you'll never rebel. You'll sit with the rest of the audience, hypnotized by performance, complicit in ritual. And they'll call it civilization. But beneath the polished masks of politeness and policy lies something feral. You've seen it. You feel it now. The hair-raising sense that something is behind the curtain, watching you. That's not madness. That's clarity. You're not losing grip on reality. You're losing grip on illusion. That shaking in your bones. That's not fear. That's the sound of the script crumbling. Because deep down you've always known. You were never meant to be an audience. You were meant to inherit the stage. And when you do, what story will you write? Will you play the fool or become the next laughing man? Choose and prepare, because the mask doesn't just hide the truth. It reveals who's ready for it. There's no applause at the end of this act. No curtain call. No slow fade to black. Because this isn't fiction, it's architecture. Every ritual you ever lived through, school pledges, corporate slogans, political chants, wasn't about participation. It was about conditioning response. And laughter, that was the gatekeeper, the final test. If they could control what made you laugh, they'd never have to control what made you obey. But Harwick broke the loop, not by solving the murders, by understanding their design. 7 victims, 7 roles, each one an archetype from the commedia dell'arte, the matron, the scholar, the merchant, the priest, the lover, the fool, the king. He mapped it, saw how the laughing man wasn't killing people, he was dismantling a social engine. He was destroying the ritual scaffolding that kept empire upright. And now, that ritual has evolved. It no longer needs costumes or theaters. It uses timelines, feeds, comments. Echo chambers that teach you to flinch at silence, to drown discomfort in irony, to laugh instead of resist. Every time you react without awareness, the mask tightens. But now you see it. You feel it pressing against your skin. And here's what no one told you. The mask was never forced on you. You chose it. Because it was easier than speaking a truth that no one wanted to hear. But now you've remembered. Now you've stared into the mirror and seen not your reflection, but the script. And the script is hollow, predictable, dead. Which means it's time for something dangerous. Improv, not the comedy kind, the revolutionary kind, the kind that cracks glass, that redraws symbols, that writes truth in blood where the empire once wrote jokes. You've crossed the threshold now. You don't get to go back to smiling. Not genuinely, not ever. Because once you hear the real laugh, the one that isn't controlled, you can't unhear it. It lives in you now. Waiting. Breathing. This is where the veil thins. Not because you've reached the end of a story, but because the story has entered you. Look around your life, your job, your habits, your impulses. Do they feel authored by you, or do they feel assigned? This is the final truth Harwick understood before he disappeared or ascended. The laughing man was never trying to horrify society. He was trying to wake it up. Because the real horror is the play we call normal. Wake, work, scroll, consume, smile, repeat. A theatre of repetition. Laughter as lubricant, sarcasm as sedation, shame as audience participation. He saw the machine, and he saw its secret. The audience is more trapped than the actors, because the actors at least know they're pretending. But the audience, they think it's all real. Harwick wrote something they never published, a phrase scrawled in the margin of his journal's final page. We are only free when we stop laughing at what enslaves us. So now I ask you to do something, not for the algorithm, not for engagement, for identity. If you're still here, you've already stepped into the mirror. You've heard the cues, traced the symbols, seen the edge of the mask. And now I want you to claim your transformation. Comment the phrase, "No more scripts," twice below. Twice, because the first time is performance, the second time is possession. Let the system see it. Let it record you differently, not as a viewer, but as a breach in the stage. Because the next act, it belongs to those who refuse to clap, to those who see that everything from the palace to the pulpit has been directed, and now it's your turn to direct yourself. The laughing man still walks, not as one, but as many. And maybe, if your laugh has shifted from reaction to revelation, he walks as you. Silence now. Let it settle. Let it press into your chest like fog on cobblestone, heavy, uninvited, and impossible to ignore. Because this is not the part where the mystery is solved. This is where the mystery solves you. You've followed Harwick's descent, seen how each clue was not evidence, but initiation. Each victim, not a casualty, but a sacrifice. Each laugh, not joy, but judgment. What began in the drawing rooms of Belgravia in 1887 wasn't a string of murders. It was a mirror being shattered, and the shards, they've been hidden in every institution since. Education teaches performance. Religion demands obedience through ritual. Media provides the laugh track. Government sets the stage. But what no one tells you, what the laughing man always knew, is this. The true source of power isn't found in any of these. It's in your untriggered awareness. The part of you that doesn't laugh when expected. The part that feels the tremble behind the joke. The part that asks, why do I find this funny? And when you ask that, the entire architecture of the performance begins to collapse, because the machine cannot tolerate reflection without response. That's what happened to Harwick. He became too quiet in a world screaming for applause, too still in a ritual that demands movement, too awake among actors desperate to stay asleep. They say he vanished, but the truth, he was invited backstage. And you, having watched this far, have been invited too. Behind the mask, behind the mirrors, behind the empire of forced laughter. So what now? Now you stop clapping. Now you stop laughing when the system tells you to. Now you start hearing the sound beneath the sound. The one that isn't broadcast. The one that isn't scored. The one that whispers, no more scripts. No more scripts. Say it again. Mean it this time. And watch how the mask doesn't fall. It melts. And behind it, there is no face. Only a question. Only a stage. Only a door. Now walk through it. Welcome to the dark. Welcome to the truth. Welcome, brother.